Stapes escorted Meloan into the room while Alvaron and I rose to our feet. She was dressed in grey and lavender, and her curling chestnut hair was pulled back to reveal her elegant neck. Meloan was followed by 2 serving boys carrying a wooden chest. The mayor moved to take his wife's elbow while Stapes directed the boys to set the chest to one side of her chair. Alvaron's manservant hurried them outside and gave me a conspiratorial wink before he closed the door behind himself. Still standing, I turned to Meloan and made my bows. "I am pleased to have the chance to meet with you again, milady." I made the last a question, as I wasn't sure how to address her. The Lackless lands used to be a full earldom, but that was before the Bloodless Rebellion, when they still controlled Tinue. Her marriage to the Alvaron complicated things too, as I wasn't sure if there was a female counterpart to the title of Mershon. Meloan waved her hand easily, dismissing the issue entirely.
"Lady is well enough between us two, at least when we are closeted. I've no need for formality from one to whom I owe so great a debt."
She took hold of Alvaron's hand.
"Please sit if you've a mind."
I made another bow and took my seat, eyeing the chest as casually as possible. It was about the size of a large drum made of well-jointed birch and bound in brass. I knew the proper thing to do was engage in polite small talk until the matter of the chest was broached by one of the 2 of them. However, my curiosity got the better of me. "I was told you were bringing a question with you. It must be a weighty one for you to keep it so tightly bound." I made a nod toward the chest. Meloan looked at Alvaron and laughed as if he had told a joke.
"My husband said you weren't the type to let a puzzle sit for very long."
I gave a slightly shamefaced smile. "It goes against my nature, lady."
"I would not have you battle your nature on my account."
She smiled.
"Would you be so good as to bring it round in front of me?"
I managed to lift the chest without hurting myself, but if it weighed less than 10 stone, then I'm a poet. Meloan sat forward in her chair, leaning over the chest.
"Lerande has told me of the part you played in bringing us together. For that, my thanks. I hold myself in debt to you."
Her dark brown eyes were gravely serious.
"However, I also consider the greater piece of that debt repaid by what I am about to show you. I can count on both hands the people who have seen this. Debt or no, I would never have considered showing you, had not my husband vouchsafed me your full discretion."
She gave me a pointed look. "By my hand, I will not speak of what I see to anyone," I assured her, trying not to seem as eager as I was. Meloan nodded. Then, rather than drawing out a key as I'd expected, she pressed her hands to the sides of the chest and slid 2 panels slightly. There was a soft click, and the lid sprang slightly ajar. Lockless, I thought to myself. The open lid revealed another chest, smaller and flatter. It was the size of a bread box, and its flat brass lock plate held a keyhole that was not keyhole-shaped, but a simple circle instead. Meloan drew something from a chain around her neck. "May I see that?" I asked. Meloan seemed surprised.
"I beg your pardon?"
"That key, may I see it for a moment?" "God's bother," Alvaron exclaimed. "We haven't come to the interesting bit yet. I offer you the mystery of an age, and you admire the wrapping paper." Meloan handed me the key, and I gave it a quick but thorough examination, turning it in my hands. "I like to take my mysteries layer by layer," I explained. "Like an onion?" he snorted. "Like a flower," I countered, handing the key back to Meloan. "Thank you." Meloan fitted the key and opened the lid of the inner chest. She slid the chain back around her neck, tucked it underneath her clothes, and rearranged her clothes and hair, repairing any damage done to her appearance. This seemed to take an hour or so. Finally, she reached forward and lifted something out of the chest with both hands. Holding it just out of my sight behind the open lid, she looked up at me and took a deep breath.
"This has been,"
she began, Just let him see it, dear, Alvaron interjected gently. I'm curious to see what he thinks on his own. He chuckled. Besides, I fear the boy will have a fit if you keep him waiting any longer. Reverently, Melouan handed me a piece of dark wood the size of a thick book. I took it with both hands. The box was unnaturally heavy for its size, the wood of it as smooth as polished stone under my fingers. As I ran my hands over it, I found the sides were carved, not dramatically enough to attract the attention of the eyes, but so subtly my fingers could barely feel a gentle pattern of risings and fallings in the wood. I brushed my hands over the top and felt a similar pattern.
You are right,
Melouan said softly.
He's like a child with a midwinter's gift.
You haven't seen the best of it yet, Alvaron replied. Wait until he starts. The boy has a mind like an iron hammer. How'd you open it? I asked. I turned it in my hands and felt something shift inside. There were no obvious hinges or lid, not even a seam where a lid might be. It looked for all the world like a single piece of dark and weighty wood, but I knew it was a box of some sort. It felt like a box. It wanted to be opened.
We don't know,
Melouan said. She might have continued, but her husband hushed her gently. What's inside? I tilted it again, feeling the contents shift.
We don't know,
she repeated. The wood itself was interesting. It was dark enough to be raw, but it had a deep red grain. What's more, it seemed to be a spice wood. It smelled faintly of something, a familiar smell I couldn't quite put my finger on. I lowered my face to its surface and breathed in deeply through my nose, something almost like lemon. It was maddeningly familiar. What sort of wood is this? Their silence was answer enough. I looked up and met their eyes. You don't give a body much to work with, do you? I smiled to soften any offense the words might bring. Alvaron sat forward in his chair. You must admit, he said with thinly veiled excitement, this is a most excellent question. You've shown me your gift at guessing before. His eyes glittered grey. So what can you guess about this? It's an heirloom, I said easily. Very old. How old would you think? Alvaron interjected hungrily. Perhaps 3,000 years, I said, give or take. Melouan stiffened in surprise. I am close to your own guesses, I take it? She nodded mutely. The carving has no doubt been eroded over the long years of handling. Carving? Alvaron asked, leaning forward in his chair. It's very faint, I said, closing my eyes, but I can feel it. I felt no such thing.
Nor I,
said Melouan. She seemed slightly offended. I have exceptionally sensitive hands, I said honestly. They're necessary for my work.
Your magic?
She asked with a well-hidden hint of childlike awe. And music, I said. If you'll allow me? She nodded. So I took her hand in my own and pressed it to the top of the box. There. Can you feel it? She furrowed her forehead in concentration.
Perhaps. Just a bit.
She took her hand away.
Are you sure it's a carving?
It's too regular to be an accident. How can it be you haven't noticed it before? Isn't it mentioned in any of your histories? Melouan was taken aback.
No one would think of writing down anything regarding a Lackless box. Haven't I said this is the most secret of secrets?
Show me, Alvaron said. I guided his fingers over the pattern. He frowned. Nothing. My fingers must be too old. Could it be letters? I shook my head. It's a flowing pattern like scrollwork, but it doesn't repeat, it changes. A thought struck me. It might be an illish story knot. Can you read it? Alvaron asked. I ran my fingers over it. I don't know enough Illish to read a simple knot if I had the string between my fingers. I shook my head. Besides, the knots would have changed in the last 3,000 years. I know a few people who might be able to translate it at the university. Alvaron looked to Meluan, but she shook her head firmly.
I will not have this spoken of to strangers.
The mayor seemed disappointed by this answer, but didn't press the point. Instead, he turned back to me. Let me ask you your own questions back again. What sort of wood is it? It's lasted 3,000 years, I mused aloud. It's heavy despite being hollow, so it has to be a slow wood like hornbeam or rennel. Its colour and weight make me think it has a good deal of metal in it too, like roa. Probably iron and copper. I shrugged. That's the best I can do. What's inside it? I thought for a long moment before saying anything. Something smaller than a salt box, I began. Meluan smiled, but Alvaron gave the barest of frowns, so I hurried on. Something metal, by the way the weight shifts when I tilt it. I closed my eyes and listened to the padded thump of its contents moving in the box. No, by the weight of it, perhaps something made of glass or stone. Something precious, Alvaron said. I opened my eyes. Not necessarily. It has become precious because it is old and because it has been with the family for so long. It is also precious because it is a mystery. But was it precious to begin with? I shrugged. Who can say? But you lock up precious things, Alvaron pointed out. Precisely. I held up the box, displaying its smooth face. This isn't locked up. In fact, it might be locked away. It might be something dangerous. Why would you say that? Alvaron asked curiously.
Why go through this trouble? Meluan protested. Why save something dangerous? If something is dangerous, you destroy it.
She seemed to answer her own question as soon as she had voiced it.
Unless it was precious as well as dangerous.
Perhaps it was too useful to destroy, Alvaron suggested. Perhaps it couldn't be destroyed, I said. Last and best, Alvaron said, leaning forward even further in his seat. How do you open it? I gave the box a long look, turned it in my hands, pressed the sides. I ran my fingers over the patterns, feeling for a seam my eyes could not detect. I shook it gently, tasted the air around it, held it to the light. I have no idea, I admitted. Alvaron slumped a little. It was too much to expect, I suppose. Perhaps some piece of magic? I hesitated to tell him that sort of magic only existed in stories. None I have at my command. Have you ever considered simply cutting it open? Alvaron asked his wife. Meluan looked every bit as horrified as I felt at the suggestion.
Never,
she said as soon as she caught her breath.
It is the very root of our family. I would sooner think of salting every acre of our lands.
And hard as this wood is, I hurried to say, you would most likely ruin whatever was inside, especially if it is delicate. It was only a thought, Alvaron reassured his wife.
An ill-considered one,
Meluan said sharply, then seemed to regret her words.
I'm sorry, but the very thought.
She trailed off, obviously distraught. He patted her hand. I understand, my dear, you're right, it was ill-considered.
Might I put it away now?
Meluan asked him. I reluctantly handed the box back to Meluan. If there were a lock, I could attempt to circumvent it, but I can't even make a guess at where the hinge might be, or the seam for the lid. In a box, no lid or locks, Lackless keeps her husband's rocks. The child's skipping rhyme ran madly through my head, and I only barely managed to turn my laugh into a cough. Alvaron didn't seem to notice.